Hello again, it's me Mandala, and today I wanted to do something actually very different and talk about gear and the importance of gear in endgame instance content in Guild Wars 2. So, mostly on this channel we focus on open world stuff, and maybe I've done some videos on lore and other things, community related things. But today I wanted to talk specifically about gear in endgame instance content and maybe do a numerical analysis of gear and put the numbers and statistics into a perspective that hasn't been given a lot of light by the Guild Wars 2 community, and maybe will help people understand what is and isn't important when it comes to endgame instance content in Guild Wars 2. And so what I wanted to do is talk about gear and like what the gear requirements should be for endgame instance content, and why I think the community has a somewhat flawed and skewed opinion of what constitutes um, viable and unviable builds and gear for endgame instance content. So to get this point across, this video is going to have a lot of numbers in it and some math. And so if that's not your thing, if like you don't want to like participate in some numerical analysis, that's fine. This video might not be for you, but this is going to be go into a little bit of like the math of damage per second and what that means for your group, and how the stats of your build and the setup of your build is going to affect that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm here on this Untamed, this Ranger Untamed build. So this is my main Ranger uh, character, and so this Untamed is set up to be a Power Quickness Untamed, and it's not a meta build. It's a slightly off meta build, but it's running what I would consider meta DPS, like boon DPS stats and traits, etc. And so this build is running with pretty much full berserker gear. It's running sword, axe, greatsword, and then there's one diviner piece. I have diviner back piece just because I can get away with it, and it helps shore up the boon duration a little bit. But it's basically full berserker gear, and then one sec, I'm gonna mute for the dog real quick. Okay, we'll see. They're probably not going to stay quiet, but that's fine. You'll just hear a little bit of barking, and we'll all deal with it together. So yeah, so this is basically a full berserker gear. I'm running Superior Runes of the Firework for boon duration and power damage. I'm running Superior Sigil of Force, and then Superior Sigil of Concentration on both weapon sets. And this is again to get her boon duration up a little bit. I'm running the Relic of the Thief, and then these are my traits. I'm not going to go through them too much, but this is a bit of a different build than the meta build that you'll see on like typical meta sites for Power Untamed. But I'll get into why I've chosen a little bit of an off meta build a little bit later. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is just like the first thing I wanted to do is demonstrate a build that in theory would pass like a gear check. So if someone saw this gear, they'd be like, yeah, you're fine to go into raids. This is okay. And showcase what the damage would look like on this build. So typically right now for quickness DPS builds, the like meta benchmark in the hands of the best players is hitting somewhere around, like the highest builds are like the quickness Deadeye and the power quickness warrior builds, and they're like 37 ish. This build, on the meta version of this build, the power quickness Untamed, is hitting about 35k damage per second in perfect scenario with a perfect setup, with the meta builds, with infusions and the correct foods and everything. And so this is a bit off meta, but just really quickly, I'm going to do a demo of this build and show you the DPS number that I'm hitting on this slightly off meta build, slightly more casually leaning build. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about what this means, and you'll see where I'm going in a little bit. But first we have to do a golem pull on this build. So I'm going to set up the golem, and then we're going to do that. So I'm going to mute real quick, and then we'll do that.
A deadly raid squad is a happy raid squad. Practice your skills using our state-of-the-art golems.
Alright, so I hit about 28k. If you saw, there's kind of a bug going on. I don't know if it's a bug or just a bad interaction with one of the skills that makes you leap like through your target on the untamed sword unleashed ambush skill, but that messed me up a little bit, and then I made a few more mistakes later on. But you saw I was around like 29k up until I started up until the mistake started happening, and then I was like 28.8, and then like this is where the mistake happened right here, and then I'm like 28.1, 28.8, 28 flat, and so with this build you can hit around like 29k. Like I have hit like right at 29k when I've tested this build with this setup. But we hit 28k here, so we're going to use the 28k number, but just keep that number in mind, right? And just remember that the highest you could possibly hit on an untamed build is the 35k. So like if I type, so just so people have the number, so if I type 35,000, right? That's the highest you could possibly hit at all. And then this build, which is more casual friendly, easier setup, different weapon sets, different trait lines, 28k. So, which is still fine. If you're like, ooh, that's kind of trolling that you're only doing 20k, it's like, no, it's not really. It's really not. So, but just keep these numbers in mind. So the first number is the 35k. The second number is the 28k. And so the first question we could ask about like gear and build is like, okay, so you're running this kind of off meta build. You ran it kind of poorly. You only did like 28k damage, right? So what does that mean in the context of an actual encounter? So um, the number I want the first number I want you to think of is like what a like a DPS is running. And so for this numerical crunch, this number crunch, I'm going to ask you to consider that the DPS on average, so there's going to be 6 DPS players in your group, in your raid group or your strike group, and they're all going to be um, averaging 40,000 damage. So that's pretty high. You're almost never going to find a group that's actually able to do that. If you like got all 6 of your DPS players and made them do a benchmark pull, um, you're you're pretty much never, especially in a pug setting, going to find a group that has 6 players all doing 40k plus the first time they walk into the door on the golem room with their DPS setup. And so this is a really high number, but you'll see where we're going in this. So again, so you have 40,000 each DPS player is doing 40k, and you have 6 of them. So we're gonna do 6 times 40k, right? So 6 times 40k. So I have a calculator here, and I'll do the math with you guys, but like so you can do the math on your own. So if you're doing 6 times 40k, but you'll see where I'm going with this in just a second. So I'm going to keep doing the numbers. So the next one you have is, let's say you have an optimal boon DPS player. So let's say you're this 35k player, right? So that's your next person. So that's your 7th player, is a 35k DPS player. Okay, and so your third player, well, your 8th player, your second quickness, your second boon DPS is going to be me doing the 28k, right? So this is the 28,000. And then for the sake of this experiment, let's just say each healer, so you're going to have 2 healers, so you're going to 2 times, and each healer is going to be doing 1,000 damage, so 2 times 1,000. Alright, so in total, you're on your, like, and that's a really low number for the healers, but just for the sake of simplicity, that's the number we're going to use, right? Because a lot of healers do less than that sometimes in pug groups, and then you'll have healers do like a lot more, like 5, 10k sometimes, but we're going to ignore those scenarios and just focus on what this means for a group with this setup. So six DPS players doing 40k, and again, you'll hear dogs. Sorry, one DPS player, one perfect player, 35k boon DPS, and then me on the 28k. So the first question is, what's the total group damage on the golem? And so if we do 40,000 times 6 plus 35 plus 28 plus the 2k, and that's going to get us at, on the golem, right, in this just the golem room, 3. Oh, excessive messaging. Okay, let's do it this way. Let's use the squad. You were not in a squad. Let's make a squad. Okay. I don't think I can create a squad. Anyway, so we're just gonna I'm not gonna type them out, but the number you're gonna have is 305,000 damage per second. So that's on a golem, 305,000 damage per second. So what does this mean for an actual encounter? So let's say we're in an actual encounter. I'm going to use the number 57 million. So 57,000,000, and that's going to be the health points of your strike boss or your thing. And this is actually the health of Dagda CM, so the Cosmic Observatory CM strike. This is the health of that boss. So let's say we go with this group into Dagda CM, and Dagda has 57 million HP. And let's say that because of like all the different mechanics, etc., everyone's doing about half the damage they would be doing, half the damage they would be doing on the golem in the encounter. And that's not going to be exactly perfect, but just for the sake of this experiment, let's use that number. So half of 305,000 damage per second divided by 2 is going to be 152,500 damage per second, right? So 152,000 damage per second, and so we're going to divide Dagda's health, 57,000,000, so 57,000,000 divided by the 152,500, and that's going to give us the number 373.77, and we're just going to round that up to 374. So if you're good at like time math, that is going to be 6 minutes and 14 seconds. So just keep that number in mind. So with this group, with me and a perfect player, and everyone else is like the perfect player kind of, the group is going to have Dagda dead in 374 seconds, which is 6 minutes and 14 seconds. So the question is, the first question I want to ask is, now let's replace me with the perfect player and see what that number, what that time comes up to. So like me in the squad with an off meta build, just kind of memeing, trolling, made a few mistakes, versus the perfect player. What's it going to do for your squad? So one sec, I'm going to do a drink of water and then we'll talk. I'll continue. Okay, and so the quickest way to do this is to just go back to our 305,000 number, and you're just going to subtract my DPS, which is the 28k, and that's going to give you 277,000, and then we're going to add the perfect player boon DPS, which is going to be that 35k. Alright, and so that's going to move our number. It's going to give us 7k more damage, right? You could have done that, just mental math in your head, but just for the sake of making sure we go through the steps in the process. So we have 312,000 damage per second for the group now, and so we're going to take Dagda's 57 million, and we're going to divide by that. Well, first we're going to divide the 312 in half. So divide that in 2, and that's 156,000 damage per second. And then we're going to take the 57,000,000, and we're going to divide that by the 156, and we're going to get the number 365. So the difference between the perfect player on the most meta build in this group versus having me in this group, how much time did you save? We went from 374 seconds to 365 seconds. And so that went from 6 minutes and 14 seconds to 6 minutes and 5 seconds. So the squad saved a grand total of 9 seconds. Yay, 9 seconds. So that's the first thing I want you to consider, right? Is the difference between me and the perfect player in this encounter. And obviously there's going to be other things to consider, like your actual performance, but essentially just for the sake of talking about gear and the builds here, right? We're talking about builds and gear. The difference between me and that perfect player in the perfect build is going to be just the 9 seconds. All right, so now I'm gonna move the conversation to the next level, which is going to be the quality of the gear, and this is where it starts to get more interesting. So really quickly, again, just 1 second, then we'll talk about that. Okay, so now I'm gonna do something that's gonna, you're probably on board with me for that first part, but we're gonna do something a little more controversial now, and I'm gonna switch to a new build. I'm gonna switch to my second build set. Okay, and this build, it's the same build from a traits perspective. Like the build is the same, still a power quickness untamed, but I'm now running all rare gear in every slot. So this is all rare gear now. And some of you are probably already freaking out. You're like, oh no, this is awful. Don't tell people to play rare gear, but just hold up. Okay, so all rare gear in these slots now. I'm still running the Rune of the Firework. I've had to change some of the sigils around to make sure that I have the precision I need because rare gear has less stats, obviously. But it's pretty much the same build now in full rare gear, and I'm gonna do another golem pull. So again, and just to say show it's the same build, same weapons, same everything, and we're gonna do the pull, same food, and we're gonna do the pull in rare gear, and we're gonna look at that number. Okay, so don't leave yet. I know you've already you're rolling your eyes. Don't do it. Stay. And I'm gonna do the golem pull, and then we'll talk about it. Alright, so now that we did the rare rotation, and again, I made a few mistakes. I actually made less critical mistakes in that pull than I did in the first one. But we're hitting right around 22. You can hit almost up to 23k with the rare gear setup that I have here. But we're hitting about, so let's just use the number 22,000, right? So now we're at the number 22,000. Okay, so this is our new number in this analysis. So if we remember the first few numbers we did, right, which is the 40,000 for the DPS, the 2k total for both healers, and then the 35k for the perfect player. So now, as the second boon DPS, we're not going to have the perfect player. We're not going to have me in the full ascended gear. on the off meta build. We're gonna have me in an off meta build in full rare gear, right? So like if anyone's wondering, if you told someone you're in full rare gear, you're gonna get insta kicked, right? Insta kicked. Automatically they're gonna assume you're terrible at the game. You're gonna get instantly removed from the group probably in the vast majority of groups of any skill level, any tier, even like a training group. They're gonna be mad at you for doing that. But if we do the numerical analysis, right, we're focused on the numbers. What's the difference between this rare build and and these other two versions, right? The perfect player and then me on the off meta build. So the difference between uh, me on the off meta build with really good gear is the 22k versus the 28k, and so we're gonna take that number, right? The 305,000, which is the me with the group, the 28k with the group, and then we're gonna subtract that 6k, right? 6k DPS, and then we're going to divide it by 2 again, right? So that's going to give us, the divided by 2 number is 149,500 damage per second. All right, and so we're going to go back to that Dagda fight, right, the Dagda HP, and we're going to do the 57 million. So 57,000,000, and we're going to divide by the 149.5 thousand, 100,000, and that's going to give us 381 seconds. All right, so if we remember the numbers from before, the perfect player was, and let me scroll back up in my calculator, the perfect player was 365 seconds. Me on the off meta build with really good gear was 374 seconds. And then this build, which is like the blasphemous build, right? Blasphemous off meta in rare gear, doing 22k, which is not a number people will be impressed by on the golem, is doing 381 seconds. All right, so the difference between me, so me on the off meta rare gear and me on the off meta with good gear goes from 374 seconds to 381 seconds, right? So if you're looking at these two players, right, one seems obviously like within the realm of possibility, within like the like, we're okay with this build range, and the other is like completely blasphemous, right? Like most people won't give you the time of the day. The only difference between these two builds is 7 seconds, right? So it'll take you 7 seconds longer for your group to kill the boss with those two players, and the difference between this build and the perfect player, right? Someone like in the context of like the community discussion around buildcraft and gearing and proper endgame preparedness, the difference between someone absolutely trolling and the perfect player is the 365 seconds to the 381 seconds. So that's 16 seconds, right? So it'll take you 16 seconds longer to kill the build, and then some of you might be saying like, oh wait, but also like rare gear has lower armor. Okay, yeah, rare gear does have slightly lower armor values. All right, here I'm going to show you something. Again, we're doing numbers here, so I'm going to show you this again. One second, I'm going to show you this real quick. Okay, so here's your armor value. All right, this is the combination of your toughness and all your armor stats, so like your defensive stats, and then you can see our HP here, 19.8. So this is the armor value we have on the rare setup, 2015. The armor value on the full ascended gear sets, the proper gear, is 2173. Right, so you're getting like 170 extra armor, which is almost nothing. But as you saw, we set this up to be a little more casual friendly, so I'm not using any of the utility skills on this build. If we come back to the rare gear, and like let's say, and let's take this protect me off, right, and let's put on the signet of stone. All right, now I'm at 2195 here. Go back to this build. So on the rare build, I can be just as tanky and just do the 6k less DPS, and it's only costing the group 7 seconds, and then it's only costing the group versus the perfect player the 16 seconds. And so you're kind of starting to see where I'm going with this. Like the conversation we have, like the troll build isn't actually that troll, right? It's actually not that big a deal to have a player running rare gear in your endgame instance content, like running with you in this group setting. And the difference between them gearing a rare set and them gearing and you shouldn't gear a rare set. You should probably gear an exotic set. And this conversation becomes very different when you gear an exotic set. But I'm using rare gear to make the point, to emphasize the point here. But with the rare gear versus the ascended gear, you're saving just the 7 seconds. And the difference in time for that player to gear a rare gear set versus gearing a full ascended gear set is crazy. It's astronomical. It's hundreds of hours of gameplay for most people, unless you're like being super optimal, and new players aren't going to do that. So this is the conversation that I'm trying to get to, and so we're going to go even one step further now, and I'm going to go to another version of this build, and we're going to talk about it. So I've one more version of this build that I want to bring into the conversation, and then we'll talk about it. So one sec. Okay, so this is the third build that I'm going to be testing in the Golem room, and this one's gonna be the most, like, maybe it's not the most, but it's equally as blasphemous as the rare gear. So this is my open world build for power quickness untamed, and it's running full celestial gear, right? Celestial in every single slot, and some people are freaking out right now. They're like, it's a power build running celestial gear. They're freaking out. Okay, so full Celi in every hole. I'm running Relic of Zakiro, so this is just like an open world. I'm running Superior Sigil of Strength, and so this is just an open world build, but let's make it a little less troll, right? We're still in full ascended gear, but let's make it a little less troll. So instead of these strength runes, let's just put strength sigils. I mean, let's just put sigils of force in here instead of the sigils of strength. And we're going to change the Relic of Zakiros to the Relic of the Thief. And then if we were actually in like a group setting, we'd probably change this to Spirit of Nature. We might move this here, and then we'd probably have like Storm Spirit here to like on-demand CC in this slot. And some people use this for damage. I don't use this for damage, especially not on this setup where we don't get the double slam. Don't use this for damage. But this is the third of our builds. And the other thing that I'm doing that's kind of trolly is I'm just going to be using the birthday cake food again. So this is going to... Alright, so people are freaking out again. Alright, birthday cake food. Okay, and then I'm actually going to use a real utility. I'm going to use the Superior Sharpening Stone. So kind of fake food, real utility, still on the off-meta build, power build, in full Celi gear, right? Open world build, in full Celi gear, and I'm going to do a Golem pull. So real quick, we're going to do a Golem pull, and you're going to see another number, alright, and then we'll talk about it. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll talk about it.
Welcome. Feel free to approach the console and begin combat practice. If you have any questions, I'm all ears.
Okay, so that was the cleanest rotation of the three that I've done. So maybe you'd subtract like 400 or something to even it out with the other two performances. But let's just use the 23k that I hit. I hit 22,999, so let's just round it up 23k. So in full Selly gear again. So if you told someone that you're running an off meta build, you're running a power build using Great Sword on Ranger in full Selly gear, insta kick from the group. You're not gonna get to play the content. But if we look at it numerically, right, on this off meta build in full Selly gear with the greatsword, right, we're and not using any like damaging utilities, right? We're just using these as utility, except for I guess the signet here. 23k. All right, so if we go back to those numbers we were doing, right? So let's just do the difference between the perfect player and this person on the 23k. So the perfect player was the 312 100,000, right, divided by 2, and that was the 365 seconds is what we got to. So with this build, instead of the 312,000, we're going to subtract, so the difference between 22k and 35k, so we're going to subtract 13k, right, 1300, right, is that correct? Let's see, 23, 35, no, it's 12, so we're going to subtract 12,000, so it's going to give us exactly 300,000 damage per second in total. And again, so we're doing the Dagda fight, so divide everything by 2, so it's at exactly 150,000, right? And then we're going to take that 57 million, 57,000,000, divide by the 150,000, and that's going to give us 380 seconds, right? So that's 380 seconds, and remember the perfect player is the 365 seconds. So the difference between this build that most people in the Guild Wars 2 community would consider absolutely trolling to take into like a Dagda CM encounter, the difference between this build and having the perfect player fill that slot instead is 15 seconds, right? So a phrase you'll hear a lot in the Guild Wars 2 community is like respecting people's time, and so this is the time you're respecting is 15 seconds. The difference between this player and the best player that you could possibly get to fill that role is 15 seconds. And so to go back through the other different ones, right? So this one's 15 seconds. The rare gear one is 16 seconds. The perfect gear but off meta build one is going to be 7 seconds. And then obviously the perfect player is 0 seconds. That's the 365 second encounter, right? So you see kind of with this numerical analysis how this filtering by gear and by like the meta-ness of your build starts to look in the context of respecting people's time and what that actually means for your group. So in the time it would take you to go like, your gear is not great, I'm sorry. And if you're a slower typer, like that's the amount of time you're saving. Like that's the time you've just spent. Like you could run if you just ran the group instead of typing that out to someone. That's the difference in between that player and the perfect player in your group. And so you can start to see how we kind of have this like really erroneous discussion around gear and like in build policing and preparedness for raids and stuff. And I think this conversation can get a lot more interesting. So to ask yourself like why would you want to run this Selly setup? So to come back to the Selly build. So the first thing is this build is a lot tankier, right? We have 2800 armor instead of the 2100 or 2200 that we had in the berserker build. We have a lot more health, right? Instead of the 20k health, we have 27k health. We have better boon duration, right? So instead of the other build was like the one with the one diviner piece was 38% boon duration, this one has 60. So because we're a quickness DPS support, we have a lot more room on both our quickness uptime, and we provide might on this build too. So we have a lot more room to like wiggle room on this boon build. We also have healing power, and we also have a lot of self-sustain, And like I said, because this was my open world build, we're going to do one more pull the golem, and this is kind of like just to show you like why would you want to run a build like this, and it's because this build is really self-sufficient. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change back to uh, the more troll, right? The technically more troll setup, so like uh, open world, the full open world setup. And I'm gonna do one more thing, right? So I'm gonna set this golem up differently. So it's not going to have this full boon panel from the console, and it's not going to have a full condition panel from the console either. It's going to be, I'm just going to put protection on myself, and we're going to do the pull again with this build. So the only boon I'm going to get from the console is protection, and there's going to be no conditions on the golem other than the ones I'm applying on this build. So we're going to do that one, and then we'll talk about it. So one more pull. Stick with me here. And I'm gonna do one more interesting thing, and you'll see it if you pay attention.
Hi there. Use the console to begin combat testing. If you have any inquiries, come speak to me.
And so with no alacrity from other sources, right? The only thing we did there was give ourselves protection. So assume we have protection from the group. Um, is on an open world build, everything else we're providing for ourselves: quickness, fury, might, um, and we have swiftness, I guess. All the other builds, all the other boons we're providing for ourselves, we're self vuln with this build, and we're doing 21k. So no one else is providing anything to us except for someone's providing protection, just for the sake of the experiment. I had the medium damage pulsing on, and we never had to click a healing skill or do anything, change up our rotation, and we did 21k. All right, you could not do that on the other builds. You would very much suffer and struggle, and you wouldn't do any damage. But this build is very resilient in the face of suboptimal performance from other players, and so this is a reason why you would consider running a build like this. And in my opinion, if we let's untrollify the build, right? So like just like assume people can do something, right? So like let's do this, like untrollify the build a little bit. Even let's just keep the Relic of Sekiros, right? And we just trade the strength sigils for the force sigils. This is probably the least selfish setup of all of them compared to any in the list. The perfect player at the 35k, um, the good gear but suboptimal build at the 20, 28, 29k, and then the rare gear, which was the 22k, right? The 22k we hit, and then this Selly build, which was what was this one before? Was the 23k, right? This 23k, and maybe let's lose a little bit of that for the Relic of Zakiros. This 22 to 23k Selly build is the least selfish of all because it has extra boon duration. It's self-sufficient, right? You're not going to be taxing your healer because you're not going to go down very quickly. You have a lot of defensive utility, right? You have a five man res here. You have Condi Cleanse, regen well here. You have on-demand CC. You have an on-demand stun break, and you have on-demand CC from your pet skills as well on your pet swap, because you're not actually using your pet swap in your rotation, so you can rotate into it to do CC. So this is the least selfish build of the four that we went through. And this is the build, like if I were concerned about like the quality of the experience for other players playing with me, this is the least taxing on that experience for everyone else in the group. But in the current community, in the current community discourse, this build is absolutely trolling. Insta kick, probably a block. You'd probably get a block for trying to explain to someone that this build is good. And you're not taxing them. You're not being selfish. You're actually being extremely unselfish and giving a lot and making it, you are making your life a lot easier because you're so much tankier and so much more survivable. But you're making the group's experience better as well. The only thing you're not providing is optimal DPS, and I pretty often say this, but DPS is kind of a fake trait. I might post like a graph, like a chart, a table of like what you have to hit in terms of DPS, and you'd be surprised how low the number is. All of these are like above the number you need to hit as a pure DPS to hit DPS checks for every single raid in the game, pretty much. So it's, but anyway, but yeah. So as you can see, I think the conversation needs this perspective thrust upon it as we move forward with Guild Wars 2. I think there's a lot. We've moved the goalposts so far beyond what the game is actually asking of players, and we just have a really skewed perspective on what is and isn't a good build or a good gear set, and what the gear stats actually mean. All right, so that was my goal with this video, is to explain like what these gear stats actually mean. And it's also like kind of like a warning, I think, about like gear check. So like with the cosmetic inspect feature, it kind of got me a little concerned about the likelihood of like an actual gear inspection for this game. And I think, in my opinion, the Guild Wars 2 community doesn't understand buildcraft and trait lines and gear well enough for this to be a non-toxic feature and a net benefit for the game. I think this would be a net negative because of what I just said, right? So this build, insta-kick. Like, you're never getting in a group with this build. And like I said, this is the build that, in my opinion, is the least selfish and most most selfless build, the one that's helping your group the most and making the experience the most likely to succeed, is that build in anything that's not like a Harvest Temple CM or like a Ceres CM. Anything outside of those two encounters, that build's the least selfish, because you just the DPS is not the primary concern for the vast majority of content. All right, but like the rare gear one, again, this is insta kick, and we just explained it's only saving you the difference between this and the perfect player. It's only saving you 16 seconds. There's really no difference other than that. It's just the 16 seconds that saves you. And then this build is probably you're not going to get kicked for this one, but you're going to get questions. Like there are some people who are going to question like, why are you running Greatsword, right? Why are you running Greatsword? Or if they could see your trait lines, they're going to be like, why are you running Beast Mastery? I'm pretty sure the meta build is running Nature Magic, and with all the concentration buffs. And so like I think that while the idea of transparency is nice, I think the Guild Wars 2 combat system and build system is just way too complex to warrant that level of transparency. I think it's just going to make the experience a lot worse, and I think the community just doesn't understand um, the stats and like what the numbers actually mean well enough to use the system like that appropriately. And I think it would just, again, I think there's lots of cool ways to set up your character in Guild Wars 2, and I think the conversation about stats is just very narrow, uh, has a very narrow focal point, and doesn't have a lot of rational discussion going on around it. So that's what I wanted to do here, just showcase like you have the numbers, you can see what this does, and I don't buy into the slippery slope argument that everyone's going to do this and then the damage falls off a lot, because again, I'm in the camp that DPS is the least important number in your group. The most important thing is not a number. It's just mechanical, like knowledge of the encounter. It's like not getting one shot by mechanics or failing mechanics or having people die. But yeah. Anyway, so this is a video to kind of discuss gear, and hopefully it was informative. We'll see. I kind of want people to share this around, because I really do want people to understand that like that like you can run these different builds and these different gear sets, and it's not as troll as people are trying to tell you it is. And so that was my point with this video, and so take it as you will. If you want to discuss it in good faith, I'm more than willing to like provide more insight or to talk about like what is and isn't possible when we open up Buildcraft to these more. We make Buildcraft more flexible and more inclusive, and we allow more players in, because I think Guild Wars 2 genuinely benefits from allowing less skilled, less competent players to play these lower DPS but more resilient builds. And so I kind of just want to open the door to that conversation, and hopefully this video will help with that. So anyway, this is me, Mandala, and thanks for watching if you got this far. Hopefully I was coherent and explained things well, but if I didn't, I'm sorry. Anyway, bye.